preempted the questions. So I'm just going to quickly run through. We have Daniel Cruddace, who is the Senior Practice Director, Architecture, BVN, and award-winning architects. And he was previously a partner and group director of the offices sector at Shepherd Robson's London studio, and he's worked on a number of high-profile schemes in Europe, the Middle East, and now Australia. And his current projects, and we're going to talk about some of these during the time, the Quay Quarter Tower, Circular Quay, the Sirius redevelopment, which is the adaptive reuse of the 70s Brutalist building, and the Central Station Precinct and Atlassian's new HQ tower there. We have Gary Henighen, who is the senior, oh, I've got Gary on the video and everything. We've done something, either you've done something or we. Did you do something, Gary, there, or you just appeared?
I think Laurie and Daniel can now have the video, hopefully, as well.
Okay, that's a good start. Gary has built a portfolio of critically acclaimed architectural interior projects through the successful design, coordination, realisation of projects, UK, Australia, and he's led these from each stage, the design through to the site delivery phases, and he specialises in residential mixed-use towers and transition-orientated precincts. And we have Laurie up on the screen. Laurie was here at our last event, I seem to remember. Fantastic. A leader of strategy and research at BATESSMART. She's a thinker and provocateur with extensive experience in architecture, workplace design, and strategy. And she's worked everywhere, I think. Australia, Asia, New Zealand, Europe, and the United States. And she's also a prolific writer, and great to have her. So we just have a challenge with Daniel, but I think the team are working on that. So one of the things that I always find, fantastic, Daniel, we can see you loud and clear. Fantastic.
Hi there, how are you?
Falling into place. I think get-togethers like this in some ways are helpful to show people that they aren't alone in the world. Like a good actor holds a mirror up to his audience so they see themselves. What's COVID been like for you guys? Daniel, have you been in lockdown? Have you been working from home, or what's the story with you? Tell us what's your last 12 months been like?
Like most people in New South Wales, we've had a period of lockdown, but it hasn't been as bad as other states. I think we've been pretty resilient as a business. BVN, we had kind of already pre-pandemic kind of ways of working, which allowed us to have pretty robust sort of business continuity. And thankfully, we had a number of sort of projects that were at various construction stages or design stages. So we were able to kind of split our teams up rather well.
Fantastic. Gary, how about you? What's the last 13 months been like? Lockdown?
Yeah, look, I'm also based in New South Wales. I think we've been very fortunate in some respects that we had that lockdown at the start, but similar story with as many people working from home. The flexibility in the workplace has been great for us, and being able to work from home and also within the offices. And I think offices will start to come back now to closer to full capacity, and I think that's really important for everyone moving forward.
Fantastic. And Laurie, where are you based?
Well, I'm actually based in Melbourne, and so it hasn't been nearly as cheery for me because we've, as you all know, we've had a number of lockdowns. So it's been an odd year for me. I switched jobs in June last year. I used to work with Dan in Sydney. And so I left a practice and joined a practice both virtually. So that's been a really interesting experience, particularly as you try to onboard with a new organization and learn all about them, but you do that without being together. So we are together now, which is really nice, but it has been an odd ride for me for the last couple of months. And as you know, we've had more than one lockdown. And so unlike when you go up to Sydney and people seem to be kind of oblivious to the pandemic, here in Melbourne, we're always fearful that it's going to happen again.
Indeed, indeed. And Expo Trade, who are the organisers of this event, do events all around Australia. And so the last 12 months has been, yes, it's on. No, it's not. Yes, it's on. and shuffling around. So thank you for that. It's a nice connection with the people in the audience, our attendees. You know, we're all kind of in the same boat together. So I want to kick off and, yes, throw the same question at you that I used before. Do you think that the pandemic is going to be seen as a defining moment in the built environment? Has it changed the way that we think about the workplace? And do we need to work together so much? Or do we need to be concerned about other things? Laurie, perhaps this, I'm sure you've all been thinking about it at some point. Laurie, perhaps kick us off on that.
Well, I'd probably follow on from what Stephen said in that I agree that it's certainly been an accelerant, but I also think that it is going to change things quite significantly from a cultural and social standpoint. If you look back in time, during other periods of crisis, such as World War I, 9/11, the SARS epidemic, they all changed something quite significantly in how we worked and how we lived. So World War I, after that, women entered the workforce. After 9/11, we changed how we traveled and we changed our ideas around surveillance. And after SARS, we really started to think about e-commerce quite differently. So I think that there's no doubt that COVID's going to change the way we think about work. Our own research that we've done at BATESSMART indicates that there's going to be completely different place and presence models. And what I mean by that is that people aren't going to want to be coming back to, they're not going to want to come back to work every day. And that's going to have a knock-on effect to commercial towers. It'll impact precincts. And so I think that there will be some changes. The other changes that I think are going to be interesting for us to think about are some of the psychological changes that are happening to us all. Those impacts that we don't even know exactly what they mean right at the moment. During this period of time, individuals have been really let down by the institutions that were meant to be supporting them, all of us, and so I think we're going to be needing to have a lot more greater transparency, less purpose washing from institutions and from governments. And so I do think that there will be some big changes, and I just don't think we really know what they are just yet.
Fantastic. Gary, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Laurie's mentioned. I think we actually are in an unprecedented, we do have an opportunity here, an unprecedented opportunity to sort of rethink and adapt and redesign how our cities and places are actually designed. We've got, I think COVID sort of put a bit of a spotlight on the pause on everything, and everyone sort of reevaluated what's important. And I think really today's cities actually are not really essentially meeting some of a big portion of the essential needs of people, as Laurie mentioned. So, simultaneously, urbanisation is sort of the biggest driver in terms of the climate crisis that we're currently facing as well. So, cities are right at the heart of the problem of that, the buildings within the cities. But then conversely, they're sort of the answer to the problem as well. So I think if we want to make cities sort of remain livable and, through these changing times, we need to really adapt how the cities, spaces within the cities are used, cities are sort of microcosm, an ecosystem. For a healthy city, everything needs to be sort of working in harmony. I think this is a chance for us to be able to sort of, the global reset's maybe a chance to sort of, for our leaders to have a look at that and, how can we sort of enact meaningful change? Architects, urban designers, planners, everyone's involved in the built form and being able to sort of support developers to make real progress, to make a more sustainable built form to assist the cities. I think it's all in our interest to have thriving CBDs. I think Sydney CBD, something like 7% of Australia's economy comes from Sydney CBD is $130 billion worth. So, you know, for vibrant, successful cities, it's what we're looking for. But it doesn't mean we have to compromise on the quality or the sustainability of the future build form.
All right. Daniel, any thoughts on this moment in time?
Yeah, just to reiterate a little bit of what Gary and Laurie have said, I think it has been an accelerator for sure, and I think it was Gary who kind of mentioned we were kind of already thinking around these themes already, and it's not some of the ideas of Team Anywhere or whatever are kind of not new items. It's just more at the forefront, I think, and I think it's also kind of maybe that kind of elastic approach to creativity. You know, it's not just about the physical, you know, thinking about it being virtual and you know, the behavior and also how our clients are operating their buildings, I think is you know, 4 key areas that I think are now kind of at the forefront of everybody's minds, and it's not just sort of the building, I suppose, as a machine.
Cool. Gary, I want to dive in. Sorry, I was going to send this one to Daniel. Daniel, I want to dive in on the serious project that you're working on.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big fan of brutalist architecture. I love the building, but you must have some challenges with so much baggage attached to that project. You've got people like me who love the architecture. You've got people who love the reason for the building being there, you know, the housing commission sort of place, and then you've got people watching and not liking the fact that it's been sold off to developers to make money rather than the people who used to be. What are some of the special challenges on that building, working on a building that has so much interest, so many eyes are watching what you're going to do there?
Look, I mean, as a practice, we were certainly not going to participate in any intervention that would demolish the building. You know, the decision was taken several years prior to you know, the decision to look at the site to address some of the kind of fitness for purpose issues and to rehouse those that were maybe not living in the standard of, or the quality of the houses they should have been. So BVN from a social kind of responsibility perspective, we're not at all interested in participating if in looking at the site if the retention of the building was not an option. And thankfully, when we were approached, the JDH who we're working for, they sort of aligned with our aspirations on that. And I think of the shortlisted schemes, the final 3, the BVN proposals, the initial competition, BVN's proposals were the only ones to retain it. So we're pretty pleased with that as an outcome. And obviously there's the words that you used is baggage, but that's kind of I suppose outside of the architectural aspirations and the adaptive reuse of what we think is actually a really important sustainability story.
Fantastic. It's I say I like brutalist buildings, and my next question perhaps to Gary and Laurie, in 50 or 60 years time, will people be looking back at what we're building now and in the same way and saying, oh, that was a 2020s building? Like, will there be buildings that kind of stand out so much? Laurie, Gary, your thoughts?
Well, I think that we will look back, and I think that we'll see some pretty big changes. And I think that some of that started to come up this morning in Stephen's presentation with mass timber construction. We'll start the new construction techniques that are being accelerated by our basic mindset that's happened during the pandemic. But I think that there's also going to be some other things, certainly, that we're seeing in the work that we're doing. It is kind of interesting because we had some projects that were underway and then others that were done during the pandemic. And there are some pretty distinct differences. As a matter of fact, we're looking at some of the earlier work that we were doing. So some of the things that we're seeing are a greater level of activity and permeability on ground planes. So it's a slightly different attitude around security and around borders and buildings. So much more opening up. And I think particularly as we start to see work patterns change, as I said earlier, there's going to be a knock-on effect of what that means to workplaces and towers in cities. And so we'll want those ground planes to really open up more so that cities aren't totally desolate. Another thing that I think that we were already seeing it, and so this is just another accelerant, but the idea of distributing amenity up more through the building, I mean, that's already been happening, but we've all gotten used to having the opportunity to just take and walk outside, or to have the option to change our venue, our work venue. And so the idea of being able to access the outdoors, fresh air, light, and not have to go to a special area, like, oh, let's go to level 27 to access outdoors. We're starting to see a lot more about that opportunity to be able to access that distributed amenity on every floor. Mixed mode spaces, I think, will become a legacy of the pandemic for the same reasons, the ability to work inside, outside, and kind of a much bigger push towards 24/7. And again, as I was saying earlier, I don't think that that's something necessarily you see it now, but it will start to come in much more because of the different types of occupancy in cities and in communities. And I think the last thing that I'd probably add to all of this is that, and I said it earlier, I think that the impacts from a social responsibility standpoint are in its infancy at the moment. And as individuals, as organizations, as community members, we'll be demanding much more of our commercial office towers, and that'll begin to have a bit of a knock-on effect. So what I hope is that your initial question was, what does that mean in the future? I hope in the future we look back and we say, gosh, that's when we made some really good strides towards creating different types of buildings, different types of cities, and in much more responsive communities.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just to add to it, I think that's a really important point. Like, perhaps the architecture itself may not be what we all reflect back on and say, oh, that was a really distinct 2020 building, but it's maybe more about the legacy of what these buildings will achieve. And we're at, I think, a tipping point here of we can really make some really significant changes to a built form in terms of moving forward with sustainability. And I think if to answer your question, we look back in 50 years' time and we'll say that, look at the building stock that we've now left that's carbon neutral, it's not reliant on fossil fuels. I think that's really where it may be that may be the shift that we actually see, and look back with fondness on and say, well, that could be the real turning point. I think COVID's allowed us to look into that, but I think that was already happening anyway. We were recently involved in a global benchmarking study, actually, just to look at sort of international exemplars on sustainability, specifically within the residential setting. We're benchmarking for 505 George Street, which is going to be a future tall building in CBD. So it's been developed by Mavac, and the project, the owner, Coombs Property, basically they were prepared to, put a considerable amount of effort and investigation into what we could benchmark against the rest of the world. And it was quite interesting as the results were a bit underwhelming, actually. So, we come back to now and we say, well, how can we sort of move forward? And I think, being able to transition, we've proposed for 505 George Street, we've proposed to transition to the fully renewables by 2030, no reliance on fossil fuels, that these types of movements within a built form, I think, will start to be a real development we can all start to move forward with.
Good. I've had a question from the audience, and I think we'll fire it at Daniel. Is architecture better now than the 50s?
That's a great question, because I'm a lover of everything mid-century. I think it's just different. I think there's a design philosophy now, which is architecture is more encompassing. It's not maybe all stylistic. So I think there's probably an entire separate webinar on that question.
Yeah, I wanted to throw that one in because, well, we've only got about 10 minutes left. But if anyone does have a specific question for one of our panelists, please use the Q&A below to do that. I want to fire one more question at Gary in specifically, and do you think there should be more collaboration between developers and architects? I know you've written a piece on the Sydney Morning Herald, I believe, on that topic. Can you give us a quick sort of how you'd like to see that relationship grow?
Yeah, sure. Like, I think everything, all good projects are collaborations. So we're always working together as architects, designers, consultants, everyone's all together. And I think what we've found recently is that the large commercial offices, to Laurie's point earlier, they've already, the ground planes are more connected, and the links are there, and there's a social awareness, and that's really been a making of low carbon offices that have been something that they can market, but also then they have the incentive as building owners. But what we found in the residential sector is we're sort of lagging behind slightly in the residential sector, which is, I suppose, not a great position to be in, given that most of the building stock that we have is, more of the building stock we have is residential. So I think, yeah, we look to see how we can actually improve the residential incentives. I think some of the land ownership with build to rent coming through might be a slight shift in that sort of co-living, and a lot of these other modalities of living that with different ownership models may incentivize sustainability within the residential sector, which could be interesting. But yeah, I think working with developers to make sure that the technology is not seen as something that is cost prohibitive against the project, and it's actually a benefit to the project moving forward.
Cool. All right, a technology question. What sort of major technology things in either design or construction have excite you at the moment, or what's coming down the pipeline that you'd like to see happen?
You know what I would like to see happen? I'm sure you're asking this question and you're, expecting us to talk about all kinds of cool technology, which I could barely turn the laptop on and get connected. So I'm not the right one to be asking that question of. There are some interesting things in terms of more geolocative and predictive type of software that'll make people's experiences in buildings really much more interesting. But what I would love to see is I would really love to see more work done much faster on mechanical systems in buildings. Is what's happening above ceilings. And, we just saw a great presentation from Stephen that I'm assuming that they'll be pushing a lot of this, but the way that we distribute power and data in office buildings is the same way we did it 50 years ago. And the challenge with that is that while we've been talking about greater flexibility in workplaces for years and years, and we design workplaces that are highly flexible, they're not really flexible because we can't we can't move around because we don't have access to power and data. So I think it would be great to see a lot more of that. And I know, Dan can probably talk about what BVN has done in that regard in their own studio, but I'd love to be able to see that happen in many, many more buildings. And I think probably, there's great opportunities with the digital electricity solutions that were shown earlier, but I know it doesn't fall into that category of technology, but it really is. And it would enable us to use our buildings much differently.
Cool. Dan, what excites you in the technology field?
Well, we've got opportunities to really kind of look again at how spaces are used. And I think developers, whether that be residential or office or other uses, hotel, etc., are kind of really starting to kind of reassess how they value the space that they're selling. So the ground plane, understanding all of those things, how people get into the building, but the vertical transportation, as well as the services distribution, the infrastructure distribution, are kind of always items that are key to any high-rise development, not just in times of COVID, but I think they are becoming reassessed in terms of their value. The scheme that we're developing with Atlassian at the moment is similar in some respects to the scheme that Stephen just described in Toronto. It's a hybrid timber structure. It's not exclusively mass timber. But it's a series of vertical habitats which are technology-driven, giving flexibility of the floor plates, a really high-performance facade which also integrates solar technology, and a series of parklands at each habitat as you step up through the tower, and introducing those mixed mode opportunities, which I think Laurie touched on as sort of potentially a legacy item of buildings in the 2020s. So I think from a technology perspective, it's really, pushing how much can be simulated to make the buildings as efficiently as possible with pedestrian movements, reflectivity of facade, wind analysis, facade performance. I'm really excited about those sort of things that are happening at the moment and informing our designs.
Fantastic. Gary, any thought on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting because, along those lines that Dan just mentioned, transit-oriented development is not a new thing, but it's something that I think we'll see a lot more of. Daniel's project represents Central Station and it links into Central Station, and we're going to see a lot more of these precincts now that focus around about connectivity with the metro stops and how we can actually then create places and better places. The precincts now that we can develop should be and will be more focused on pedestrian movements and active transportation, and really then that connectivity. And look, I think we should also not be scared about this conversation with creating the city as well. Like Daniel's mentioned there, that through the buildings and the facades, this fantastic opportunity to start thinking about how we can actually bring the city a bit more. And it's always been one of those conversations that's stumbling block to cost, but we should also look past that and see how we can actually work together as a project team to try and incorporate planting into facades and green architecture, so it reduces heat generation. There's numerous benefits everyone's sort of fully aware of. But yeah, I think that technology is available and we should start seeing that more often going forward.
All right, just only got about 4 minutes. If I was to grant you Minister for the Day, and what would you do? Would a planning minister, national or state sort of level, what more would you like from that side of things? How would it make your job easier, or what you're trying to do easier?
I think I think everybody in the industry would welcome less sort of red tape. But I think it would be really interesting from a policy perspective if there was some incentivization for the adaptive reuse of buildings. So it really encouraged the reuse of some of the existing building stock. And so you're not just from a sustainability perspective, but you're also kind of looking after the fabric that's there. And I think there's huge vacancies in the city. Of course, we're architects, we love the new build, absolutely. But the adaptive reuse, and whether that's as radical as Key Quarter Tower, or if it's maybe a little bit more controlled and restrained like Sirius, I think there's real policy work to be done around about the existing building stock and opportunities there.
Cool. Gary, what would you do? I'm giving you the power.
Yeah, so where would you begin? I think Daniel's right, like trying to reduce the amount of red tape and regulations are good, but certainly trying to streamline the planning process to really reduce the affordability issues that we've got, especially with the residential apartments and buildings at the moment. I think that would be one of the key issues to tackle for Sydney and pretty much for Australia. Like the affordability of housing is a real issue, I think, and certainly keeping the current thinking on infrastructure spend, I think, is really good. So trying to increase that connectivity and make more of a city accessible, which helps with the housing affordability and everything else that goes with it. So, yeah.
All right, and Laurie, any thoughts to wrap us up on that?
Well, I would agree with what Gary and Dan have both said. The other thing that I think that I would add, just in ending here, is I'd love to see us have the opportunity to broaden out the way that we evaluate questions such as yours, and we start to think a little bit more about what the long-term social and psychological impacts of people. So instead of always evaluating buildings based on buildings and cities based on what they are, really start to think about what does it mean to the people, and what is the impact that we have to people. I've been doing a lot more reading that involves looking at what environmental psychologists and behaviorists say. And when you start to change that perspective, you really do look at things a little bit differently. So I'd like to have that more comprehensive approach taken.
Cool. All right, well, folks, we've run out of time. We're trying very hard to keep right on track today, because I know it's a big commitment to be here for these 4 hours or what we have together. So I would like to thank our panel, Daniel, Gary, and Laurie. Thank you for your time this morning and your insights. I know we strayed around the topic of COVID a bit, but we like to let the conversation go where it wants to go. So please, everybody, wave at our panelists, and I hope you're going to stick around for the rest of the presentations, guys. And we'll be heading into a break quite soon. So thank you very much. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
I'm going to do that. Yes.